There were a number of offensive standouts for Stanford in their spring showcase. And, it was all about the offense. They made that very clear. And so naturally, the players who, stood out the most were primarily on the offensive side of the ball. Number one, of course, EJ Smith, the fourth. Now, with Austin Jones transferring to USC, there's a question mark at the running back position a bit in terms of who's going to be the number one feature back. And Stanford has had some great ones over the years. Bryce Love was very good, part of a Pac-12 championship team, and Christian McCaffrey. And you can go all the way back to guys like Toby Gerhardt, Tyler Gaffney. Like they've just had a long line of really quality ball carriers. And so when Jones leaves, you expect them to be able to have someone who's talented waiting in the wings. And it really looks like Stanford has that in EJ Smith. I mean, he's widely expected to be the leading candidate to be the number one running back, and he looked the part. He showed a really good mix in the spring showcase of power, speed, and balance as well. But I think he's the sort of guy. Some teams are a little bit more running back by committee, but Stanford has tended to have a bell cow back, like a McCaffrey, a Love, or a Gerhardt, who can do a little bit of everything. Gerhardt was a little more strictly on the power side, but, was capable of being a guy who you give the ball to 25, 30 times a game. I think EJ Smith, the fourth, has that sort of playmaking potential. I mean, you look at his build, and he looks well balanced. And then you watch him run, and he also looks very well balanced, both in the not falling over way, but you know exactly what I'm trying to say here. But also in the versatility that he's got. That's a better way of putting it, I think. And it's funny that Austin Jones is no longer the running back there, because when I watch EJ Smith run, I think kind of looks like Austin Jones, doesn't it? I mean, they've got very similar builds. They can both do a little bit of everything, and there isn't one trait that is, so eye popping that you're like, oh, he's a specialist in that way. Like, no, they're just really well rounded backs who can do everything that you ask of them. And he had one rushing touchdown and one receiving touchdown in this game. Did EJ Smith? The rushing touchdown, it was an outside zone play. He was patient, waited, but then he was able to show the explosiveness, get to the outside, beat everybody with speed, and race inside the pylon for a touchdown. And it's a very Stanford play, right? It was just your typical power to the weak side, and he just waited, and then boom, he was off, and he outran the defense pretty well. And the other thing that he showed that I thought was really impressive was his receiving touchdown. He lines up in the slot, one-on-one with a safety. And, in the broadcast, they're calling it a Texas route. Technically, that would come from the backfield. He was just running a straight-up slant, and it ended up being a 40-yard touchdown from Tanner McKee, who put the ball right on the money, let him in stride. A lot of talk in football all the time about yards after the catch. That is as much a product of the quarterback putting the ball in the right spot as it is a wide receiver or a running back or a tight end catching it and having the explosiveness and the wherewithal to make plays. Sometimes they break a tackle to get extra yards after the catch, but quarterback has to put it on the money. Tanner McKee did, and he ran a nasty route out of the slot position. And so if he's going to be that involved in the passing game, boy, they could just use him like Christian McCaffrey, and I think that that's something that David Shaw clearly wants to do, right? It's what they've done with their running backs pretty often over the years, and I think EJ Smith really looks like he can slide into the starting role and right away be one of the best running backs in the Pac-12, up there with Tavion Thomas, and, you'll have Travis Dye, and Austin Jones will be a formidable punch at a 1-2 punch at USC. You've got Zach Charbonnet at UCLA. There are a number of good backs in this conference, but I really think that this fall, if Stanford gets back to where they are, which is an 8-10 win team, or where they should be, I should say, as a program, where they have been under David Shaw, an 8-10 win team, then you're going to know the name EJ Smith if you watch Pac-12 football, because he was you should just go look up that route. He just gives him the jitterbug and just darts inside, snags the ball, and then races into the end zone, outrunning the defense. Not a great angle from Stanford safety on the play, but I tell you what, he's going to be a tough guy to bring down. Another guy who stood out, Medea Rubin, 3-star freshman receiver from Park Hill South High School in Missouri. He is 6'3", 207 pounds. And if that sounds like a pretty big body, he looks like a pretty big body when you see it on TV. and he knows how to use it really, really well. He had a couple of touchdowns in the spring showcase. And, having that sort of frame is one thing, but knowing how to use it is another. And he knows how to use it really, really well. And since he was a recruit who committed to Stanford, by the way, he's put on about 15 pounds, but in a really good way, right? It looks like there's, a little bit of beef, but mostly muscle. And he's just such a built target, and he just fits the Stanford mold of a wide receiver. I don't think that he'll end up moving to tight end, even though there's only 4 tight ends on the roster, which I'll get to in a sec. But he's just a really big body receiver who's going to line up out wide. He was taking reps with the first team offense and the second team offense for Stanford, which is how they did it. McKee would go out there and he'd be with the first teamers, and then Patu would go out there and he'd be with the second team. And Medea Rubin was out there often. Oftentimes is the lone wide receiver on the field, right? Stanford loves the heavy sets, so go 2 tight ends and a fullback, and then have just one wide out. And Rubin's propensity to block in the running game and just be a physical presence out there was pretty pronounced. And he would have had a chance at a third touchdown, or he did have a chance, I should say, but third string quarterback Bo Nelson underthrew a 15-yard back shoulder to the end zone. So he had all 3 quarterbacks target him in one-on-one situations, and twice it resulted in a score for the offense. I think that speaks to the capability that he has and is already showing for developing trust and chemistry with his quarterbacks, and that they see what I'm seeing as well, which is this could be Stanford's top receiving target this fall. He might not be because he's a true freshman and, can often take guys a little bit more time to work their way in that sense. But the physical traits are there, and the quarterbacks trust him in 50-50 situations, and they should. He is a good route runner, got a big body. He's got soft hands. He's also an effortless runner with the ball. Some guys, run really hard and it looks like they're running hard. Other guys are really fast and it looks easy for them. And that's not something that every great athlete has. But when you watch Rubin run, he caught a drag route. I can't remember if it was from Patu or if it was from McKee, but he caught a drag route where he got away from the corner, was a little bit off, and he just beat him underneath, and the corner was struggling to catch up. And it didn't even look like he was running that hard. I'm sure he was running with 4.5-ish speed, maybe even 4.4, but it didn't look that way. And that's when you have a really good athlete. And he got a chance to play in the spring showcase because not everyone was available for Stanford, but he made the most of his opportunity, and I don't see how he's not a regular part of the rotation this fall for Stanford, because he is he's got great physical traits and he looks like he belongs already. And that could be tough for a true freshman, right? Sometimes guys get out there, you're like, might need to develop a little bit. He looks ready to contribute right away. Speaking of freshmen who could make an impact, Sam Roush, the 6'5", 4-star tight end from Lipscomb Academy in Tennessee. By the way, former Pro Bowl and Super Bowl champion quarterback Trent Dilfer is the head coach out there, if you did not know. So that's where Rauch comes from. And he came to Stanford over ASU, Arkansas, Cal, and Colorado State. And just like Reuben, he's a true freshman and an early enrollee who's already impressing in spring football so far. And now his numbers in the spring showcase were just 2 catches for 16 yards. That doesn't sound like a lot, right? Well, what if I told you that both catches were for touchdowns? Now it starts to look a little bit more impressive in terms of the box score. And so he stood out with those 2 catches about as much as you can. You talk about making the most of your opportunities. He certainly did that. He had a 1-yard touchdown catch from Patu on a flag route where he showcased the hands and the size. At his safety, who was kind of draped on his back, but he reached out and just snared it out of the air and kept it away from his body and away from the DB. And, it was a semi-contested catch, and he did a really nice job of hauling that in. I thought that was impressive. But the first one was, you just don't see freshmen making these sorts of catches. He runs a seam route from, I believe it was about the 15-yard line, and McKee puts a money throw on his back shoulder in between the linebacker and the safety. He has to contort his body around, makes the catch, and then gets upended hard by a Stanford safety. And he did almost a whole flip in the air, but he was able to hold on to it. And this is a guy who, looked about as good as he could catching the ball. And there's only 4 tight ends on this roster. You've got Ben Urosek, Bradley Archer, and Lucas Unger as well. And Stanford, known for their tight ends over the years. They've had a bunch of great ones. They've had Toilolo and Zach Ertz and Colby Parkinson. Like the list goes on and on. I'm just scratching the surface there. So he has the potential perhaps to be the next really good one, it seems, from a pass catching perspective. I haven't seen a ton from him in terms of run blocking, which always impacts how often a tight end will see the field. But I tell you what, Sam Roush, those were really, really good catches. And he and Reuben both just looked refined beyond the true freshman early enrollees that they are.